What happens when two of the world's most compelling women, one a thoughtful feminist scholar, the other a humanitarian legend, sit across from each other on live television? What begins as a calm exchange of ideas slowly unfolds into a philosophical confrontation that no one saw coming. By the end, the room will have witnessed a conversation so charged, so quietly defiant, it would echo far beyond the studio walls. The View has hosted many passionate debates over the years, but none quite like this. Emma Watson was invited to share insights about her advocacy for women's education and equity. Angelina Jolie came to speak on her continued work in war zones and refugee camps. But once their words began to intertwine, the tone shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't scandal, it was sharper, an ideological divergence laid bare for millions to witness. The air on a set that morning was still, the kind of stillness that suggests something deep beneath the surface is about to stir. Emma Watson was the first to take the stage. Clad in a simple, earth-toned linen blazer and crisp trousers, she moved with the composed energy of someone used to classrooms, UN halls, and quiet revolutions. The audience greeted her with a warm round of applause. A few murmurs traveled through the crowd. Emma's reputation preceded her. The speech at the UN, the essays, the relentless yet humble activism. Moments later, Angelina Jolie entered. Draped in elegant black, she carried an unshakable serenity, the kind that comes from walking through fire and surviving. Her presence drew admiration, and a quiet anticipation spread through the studio. Two women, both icons in their own right, now seated opposite each other, not to clash perhaps, but to challenge. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the grounded moderator, welcomed them with her signature warmth. "We are honored to have Emma Watson and Angelina Jolie with us today," she said, her tone rich with both reverence and readiness. Emma smiled gently, her posture open, hands resting thoughtfully in her lap. Angelina gave a subtle nod, her eyes calm, observant. The world leaned in. "We are so thrilled to have both Emma Watson and Angelina Jolie with us today. Ladies, welcome." Emma gave a gentle smile, her nod gracious, and settled into her seat with the quiet poise of someone used to weighty conversations. Her hands folded in her lap, she listened attentively, even when she wasn't the one being asked questions. The first 10 minutes flowed smoothly. Emma spoke about her recent work with the He for She campaign, her ongoing commitment to girls' education, and her recent research collaborations with universities on gender equity. Her answers were thoughtful, perhaps a little measured, as though choosing the right words still mattered in a world hungry for sound bites. When the focus turned to Angelina, the room shifted subtly. She spoke with depth and conviction about war zones, refugee families, and the cost of turning away from global suffering. Her words were deliberate and raw, each one grounded in experience. All was calm until Emma posed a quiet challenge. Not an insult, not a jab, just a question wrapped in curiosity. "I deeply admire the field work you've done, Angelina," she said, voice soft but firm. "But sometimes I wonder, how do we ensure this kind of work doesn't become symbolic? That it doesn't just comfort audiences but actually confronts the systems that perpetuate suffering?" A quiet hush swept the room. The audience didn't gasp, but they leaned in. Joy Behar blinked, eyes darting to Angelina. Angelina didn't falter. Her voice remained composed. "I think if your work is truly reaching people, truly saving lives, then the symbolism doesn't matter. What matters is whether someone walks away with food, safety, or hope." Polite applause fluttered from the audience. Emma nodded. "I agree impact matters, but I also think narrative plays a role. In today's world, stories shape policy, and sometimes the way those stories are told, especially by public figures, can either uphold existing power structures or challenge them." Angelina's jaw tightened, just barely, but she met Emma's eyes with steady calm. "If being visible brings awareness, then I'll accept the cameras. But the cause must always come first." Sarah Haynes, sensing the philosophical tension, interjected, "Maybe there's room for both, visibility and structural change." Emma offered a slight smile. "There has to be, but I think we must always be vigilant. Otherwise, activism risks becoming performance. The tension wasn't loud. It was thoughtful, deliberate, almost academic. But the studio felt it, a conversation between two women who lived in the same world, yet viewed its demands through very different lenses. Angelina paused briefly, her expression controlled. She looked directly at Emma, her voice calm but deliberate. Fashion or publicity doesn't push someone to spend months in war zones, she said. That work is about the people who have no voice. It's not about being seen, it's about seeing them. The tone shifted. It wasn't aggression, but conviction. Joy Behar leaned in slightly, sensing the philosophical rift. Angelina, are you suggesting that Emma's advocacy comes from a different place, maybe less grounded? Angelina gave a diplomatic smile. I'm suggesting that authenticity isn't measured by how often you're heard, but by what you choose to amplify when no one's listening. The audience murmured, a ripple of thoughtfulness rather than shock. Emma didn't react with offense. She paused, gently adjusting her bracelet, then met Angelina's gaze. I agree with you, she said softly. Visibility isn't virtue, but nor is silence, especially for women whose voices were long erased. The table quieted. Emma continued, I think we're both aware of how easily good intentions can become performance. That's why I question myself constantly. Not to prove anything, but to stay honest. I believe transparency isn't the enemy of integrity. It's the companion of it. Angelina's posture relaxed a touch. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, less about personal legitimacy, more about clashing ideologies. Whoopi, sensing a way back to center, leaned in. Maybe this is what real dialogue looks like. Messy, complex, but necessary. Still, the undercurrent remained. Emma wasn't trying to wound, but her words carried weight. They peeled at something deeper, something not entirely comfortable. As the show went to commercial break, there were no icy stares, no whispered insults, just a glance exchanged between two women who realized they stood on different shores of the same sea. When the cameras returned, the air in the studio hadn't cleared. If anything, it had thickened, with reflection, not rivalry. Joy attempted to reset the tone with a bright chuckle. Well, ladies, she said, clearly we've got two thinkers on the couch today. Emma offered a soft smile, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Well, ladies, Joy said, glancing between them with an upbeat tone, I think we can all agree the world needs more strong women doing strong things, right? Angelina smiled with graceful diplomacy. Absolutely. Emma inclined her head in agreement. Yes, but perhaps strength doesn't always look like what we expect. There was a brief silence, respectful, curious. Whoopi cleared her throat and redirected. Let's talk about impact. Angelina, your work with the UN Refugee Agency spans more than 20 years. Emma, you've championed mental health, educational equity, gender rights. What motivates each of you to keep going? Angelina answered first. The people I meet, children who've lost everything, families forced to start over with nothing. They remind me this work must never be about us. It's about them. Emma nodded. I understand that deeply, and I think storytelling plays a crucial role. It shapes policy, perception, even empathy. But I often wrestle with a question. Who gets to tell those stories, and why? A quiet murmur passed through the audience. Emma wasn't accusing, she was inviting reflection. Because flying into a conflict zone with security and press coverage is not the same as living inside a system that fails you daily. And both perspectives matter, but they aren't interchangeable. Angelina turned slightly toward her, calm, alert. There's a difference, as she said, between being examined and being exposed, and a larger difference between advocacy that educates and branding that elevates. There was no gasp, just sharp silence, the kind that follows a truth spoken too clearly. Emma didn't bristle. Instead, she met Angelina's gaze, steady and thoughtful. I agree in part, she said softly, but I also believe younger generations want transparency. They crave vulnerability, not as spectacle, but as permission. Permission to be human without shame. Angelina's expression shifted. Not anger, but weight. Consideration. She studied Emma's face for a moment, then responded. Openness is vital, she said, but it must serve the cause, not the individual. There's a line between honest testimony and commodified pain. The audience stirred, thoughtful, uncertain, engaged. Emma looked down for a moment, then back up. Perhaps that line is thinner than we'd like to admit. A hum of agreement passed through the room. Here, the tension didn't scream, it simmered. Not personal, not petty, but powerful. Whoopi tried to move the conversation forward. Maybe let's bring this back to shared values. But Emma didn't shift the tension just yet. Her voice remained soft yet carried weight. I do find it intriguing, she said carefully, how often we celebrate voices only when they align with familiar narratives. And sometimes when those narratives shift even slightly, suddenly the room feels unsettled. Her words weren't an attack. They were a mirror. Angelina's expression tensed just slightly, not in anger but in recognition. She turned to the co-host, her voice deliberate. I didn't come here to compete over visibility. I came to talk about fractured systems, displaced families, and the women who don't have the luxury of these platforms. She paused. But somehow the spotlight keeps circling back. The audience responded, not with gasps, but a hushed silence of reckoning. Emma took a moment, folding her hands. Her gaze was unwavering. That may be true, she said, but perhaps it's because we haven't yet agreed on what the spotlight is for. Is it meant to illuminate injustice or ourselves? Angelina leaned forward slightly, her voice low and razor sharp. Some people confuse attention with purpose. The words hung in the air like frost. Emma didn't flinch. Her response was quieter, but it reached deeper. And some mistake discomfort with confrontation. Sometimes being seen is the first step toward being heard, especially for those of us taught to shrink. Whoopi raised her hand, sensing the philosophical crossfire growing heavier. Maybe we need a moment, just to breathe. But the studio wasn't breathing, not the hosts, not the audience, not the women at the center of the tension. Emma sat still, composed, but her voice carried that signature Watson firmness, the kind that doesn't yell, but lands. I've been told before, she said, that spaces like these weren't built for people like me to speak too boldly. That quiet is more palatable, and I imagine you've heard similar things, Angelina. Angelina didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flickered with something unspoken. Then, just the hint of a knowing smile. There were no insults in the air, only ideas sharpened into questions no one could easily answer. No one shines too bright for me, Emma, Angelina said quietly, but I do take issue with those who confuse the spotlight with substance. Joy Behar whispered, "Oh my God," barely audible. The air dropped 10 degrees. The co-hosts exchanged glances of silent alarm. It was clear they no longer controlled the room. A second commercial break came like a lifeline, but backstage was no calmer. Producers debated cutting the segment. The co-host whispered, wondering whether continuing was bravery or recklessness. When the cameras returned, the stage was different. Emma Watson sat upright, hands folded, not clenched, her eyes focused, not flaring. Angelina Jolie sat across, posture still graceful, but her tone now held iron beneath the silk. Joy attempted one last reset. All right, ladies, this is daytime television. Let's not forget, our viewers came for wisdom, not warfare. Emma turned, her voice cool but composed. Then let's give them that. Let's not confuse visibility with truth, or experience with ownership. Angelina responded, voice unwavering. And let's not confuse momentary attention with lifelong commitment. The air thinned. Joy flinched at the tension. Emma didn't raise her voice. You think you're the only one who's risked reputation, career, peace? I didn't walk away from a crown, but I've walked away from comfort, from silence, from institutions that didn't want to be questioned. And I did it without cameras. Angelina leaned in slightly, not angry, alert. Then why does the narrative always bend back towards you? Emma paused. I don't need it to, but every time I speak, I'm told I've spoken too loudly, too emotionally, too much. So yes, I continue to speak, not to be heard louder, but because I refuse to be muted. The audience didn't clap. They absorbed it. The conversation had moved past egos. This wasn't a personality conflict. It was a collision of purpose. Angelina blinked slowly. Empowerment, she said, isn't about who speaks the most. It's about who listens when it matters. Emma nodded once. And sometimes it's about saying the thing no one wants to hear, even if it costs you the comfort of approval. No gasps, no shouts, just a quiet storm of two women standing their ground. Not over the right to be seen, but over what it means to matter. It's about using that visibility to uplift others, Angelina said, her voice calm but firm. Not to turn it into a podcast series. That line landed like thunder. The audience went completely still. Sarah Haynes gently leaned forward, her tone hopeful. Maybe we should, but Emma wasn't finished. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered. You know, there's a quiet kind of gatekeeping too, she said, looking not at Angelina, but just past her. The kind that wears dignity like armor. That decides who's allowed to speak based on what they consider noble enough. Angelina didn't flinch, but her jaw set slightly tighter. Emma continued steady. You don't need to agree with every method, but dismissing someone's work because it doesn't match your version of sacrifice doesn't make it less real. It just makes the conversation smaller. Angelina leaned forward just an inch, her tone barely above a whisper. The spotlight is only bright to those who crave it. Emma held her gaze, or to those who've never been allowed to stand in it. For the first time, a shift appeared, not just in tension, but in meaning. This was no longer just a clash. It was a confrontation with the assumptions each woman carried. Angelina's voice hardened. I didn't come here to debate status, but I won't sit here and watch you redefine empowerment as self-promotion. Emma didn't retreat. Her eyes held sadness, not anger. I'm not redefining it, she said. I'm reclaiming it from a world that still asks women to whisper their truth if it doesn't make others comfortable. The studio was ice. No audience sound, no shifting seats, just the weight of two truths. Whoopi's hand hovered near her cards, unsure whether to intervene or let the story write itself. Emma inhaled slowly. You don't have to approve of how I speak, but don't confuse discomfort with narcissism. Not every woman who steps forward is asking to be adored. Some of us are just done apologizing for existing. Angelina didn't respond. That silence said everything. Sarah Haynes whispered what no one else dared say. Maybe we need a break, a real one. But no one moved, and then Emma adjusted in her seat. Not a stand, not a storm off, but a shift, a symbolic one. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was reckoning. Angelina watched quietly, still, controlled. Her silence at that moment wasn't passive, it was choice. And that, ironically, made Emma's stance feel even louder. A producer gestured off screen. Whoopi looked to the camera, trying to steady her voice. We'll be right back, she said. But everyone knew they wouldn't be, not really. Emma Watson had returned to her seat, though her posture betrayed the weight in the room. She sat near the edge of her chair, composed but alert, hands loosely clasped, shoulders square, as if ready to carry something heavier than words. Across from her, Angelina sat with quiet grace. She didn't fidget, didn't flinch. She simply waited, still as stone, but never cold. Whoopi was the first to break the silence. Even her experienced voice trembled slightly. Well, welcome back. I think we're all just trying to process. Emma leaned toward the mic, not to interrupt, but to clarify. Process what? She asked, her voice calm but clear. That a woman who chooses to speak with both heart and intention is still framed as performative, that transparency becomes a spectacle, and restraint becomes superiority? Angelina didn't respond, not yet. Joy Behar gently offered, No one here called you anything, Emma. Emma smiled, but it was tight, tired. No, but assumptions don't need to be spoken aloud to hang in the air. I know what it looks like, when a woman dares to take up space and doesn't do it quietly. She looked across the table at Angelina. If there's something you want to say it. Don't make me fill in the silence alone. Angelina blinked, just once. You just did, she replied. The air froze again. Even behind the cameras, the crew was still. Emma inhaled slowly. I came here to talk about change, to advocate, to remind young women that they don't need to apologize for using their voice, whether it's from a lecture hall, a refugee camp, or a camera lens. She looked around the table, then back at Angelina. But it seems that's only acceptable if I do it a certain way. If I do it without challenging tradition, without shaking the room. Angelina turned slightly, her voice still composed. No one asked you to be silent, only to listen. That line split the air. Emma didn't stand, but her voice rose, not in volume, but in presence. I've listened my entire life, she said, to institutions that told me I was too much, to mentors who said advocacy should be polite, to women who taught me strength must be soft to be accepted. She wasn't angry, she was certain. I've given up comfort, anonymity, ease, because I believe in something bigger. And if the price of being heard is being misread, I accept it. But I won't shrink to make others feel safer. Angelina's gaze held steady. Some of us never had a choice. Emma nodded solemnly. And some of us had to fight to realize we did. Silence. And then Emma looked to the panel. I don't think this is a debate between two women. I think it's a mirror held up to a society that tells women they can lead, but only if they don't make others uncomfortable. The co-host didn't move. Joy looked away. Sarah's eyes welled slightly, and then Angelina finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but final. No one diminished you, Emma. Emma looked down, then up, then offered the smallest, saddest smile. No, she whispered, but that doesn't mean I wasn't made to feel small. You did that yourself. Angelina's words dropped like a stone into deep, still water. No force, just gravity. The room didn't explode, but it hollowed out. Silence deepened, the kind that doesn't scream, it echoes. Emma didn't flinch, but she stopped breathing for a moment. Her hands tightened, just slightly, in her lap. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was low and cracked around the edges. You think you're untouchable, she said. You think your trauma is more dignified because you suffer quietly, because you don't share it. Angelina looked straight ahead, her eyes calm, her voice softer than ever. Maybe that's the difference, she said. I cry when no one is watching. You cry so no one else has to feel alone. Emma froze. The words didn't wound. They landed. She blinked hard once, inhaled, exhaled. A long pause followed. And then, with quiet certainty, she stood up. Not storming off, not breaking, just standing. She looked down at the table, at her water glass, then at the audience. I didn't come here to win, she said gently. I came to remind people that vulnerability isn't a weakness. That truth, even when messy, deserves space. She turned to the panel, not accusing, not blaming. But I also see now that not every space is built for truth to breathe. At least, not yet. She nodded once toward Angelina, a gesture not of defeat but of mutual respect. And then slowly, with measured grace, Emma Watson stepped off the stage. No clacking heels, no whispered curses, just silence, and the weight of her absence. The audience didn't clap. They couldn't. They were holding something too heavy. A moment. A producer motioned in confusion off camera. Whoopi stared at her notes, then sighed deeply. Well, she said, that won't be in the reruns. A nervous laugh sputtered through the crowd, unsure where release belonged. Angelina sat in silence, hands folded, gaze unreadable. Sarah Haynes leaned toward her mic, her voice soft like she was still waking up from something. I think we just witnessed, not a fight, but a fracture. The kind that happens when two truths try to occupy the same space. The headlines would spin. Emma Watson walks off the View after heated exchange. Some would call it principled. Others, performative. But one thing was certain. Daytime television had never seen anything like it. What do you think? Did Emma Watson take a stand, or simply walk away from a space that couldn't hold the weight of her words? Was Angelina right to challenge the medium? Or did her silence speak louder than any argument ever could? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories, unseen confrontations, and the kind of moments that matter most, when the cameras almost stop rolling.